Montague Road James, better known by his pen name of M.R. James, was an English author and medieval scholar around the turn of the 20th century. He studied at both Cambridge and Eton, so he was a bit of a smarty pants, but he was better known, you could go as far to say immortalised, by his ghost stories. Many people believe he was the king of the ghost story in horror literature, and I'm going to be talking about a collection of some of his best in this particular edition, simply called Collected Ghost Stories. A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad, Casting the Runes, Lost Hearts, Canon Alberic's Scrapbook, The Ash Tree, A Warning to the Curious. These would be close to automatic selections when talking about James's best work. Stories now that may, on the surface, seem innocent, but the M.R. James stories at their best had a real classic quality about them that lingers. James's strength as a writer was in his restraint. When the time comes to make a brush with the supernatural, he very much effortlessly outlines what it is that we're dealing with. There's nothing clear, there's no monsters ripping throats out or breaking bones. He just outlines these shapes, these textures, hair, a bit of an obscure face. So he very much leaves us in the dark with what we're dealing with, but he conflicts our judgment enough to get us trying to look that bit closer at what this is, that if it's done its job, is making our skin crawl a little bit. Definitely with James, it's a case of less is more. And what makes these scares work so well at the crescendo is the formal setting they have. It's often a nameless protagonist who's gone to investigate somewhere, some sort of church or artifact that ends up triggering something strange. And also the fact that James himself was very much a bookworm to do with history. He made some findings in his own time. So you could say he often played the part of the protagonist in a lot of his stories. He lent off a lot of history, so he really gives you the sense of these rural English places you shouldn't visit. He puts footnotes in his stories that make it feel like this is what happened then. There's a real detail to them that makes these not feel so much like little ghost stories, but more like recorded sightings that give him quite a lot of substance after you've read them. My only real detraction with these stories is that when they're read in a row, say 3 or 5 of them, they can come across as quite samey. As I've said, it's often a nameless protagonist, an academic who goes to a church or a mausoleum, stumbles across an artifact which triggers something strange, and the horror itself does almost always happens in the 3rd act, so you kind of anticipate when it's going to happen. You start to become a bit over-familiar with the process, so to speak, but that's why I'd say these are better to just pick up here and now and again to sweeten your evening rather than just get through all of them in one go. James did have some versatility to his work though. From Lost Hearts, in which the ghosts are actually the victims, to Casting the Runes, in which it has a race against time element where something has to be given back if you are going to escape death. But I think these stories are best enjoyed occasionally, and you pick them up and discover them, much like the protagonist discovers something strange that triggers the supernatural. H.P. Lovecraft, who went on to write stories, of course, a few decades later, after him, described James as being basically the king of the ghost story, and I may go on to agree with that the more I read ghost stories. I think it would be fitting, though, to end the praise with the quote at the back of this edition by Ruth Rendell, in which she says, "There are some authors one wishes one had never read in order to have the joy of reading them for the first time. For me, M.R. James is one of those."